Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Monday Morning Mailbag. I have my colleague Noah here, and today we'll be breaking down SB54. Noah, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, why don't we start off with what is SB54, James?
So SB54 is actually called the Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Responsibility Act. And in many ways, for relatively recent legislation, it's very much so reshaping how companies are going to be managing and producing single-use packaging in the state of California. Um, Really key to understand who's in charge of all this. Well, it's Cal Recycle with a single producer responsibility organization, or PRO, called the Circular Action Alliance. What will be in scope under SB 54 is quite literally all packaging sold into California, whether that's plastic, paper, metal, glass, or any composite multi-material. This is not just for manufacturers in the state of California. It's literally for anyone that ships product into the state of California.
It's really interesting. And when are things kicking off and what's going to be the evolution of it?
Well, a lot of the key targets, a lot of the most aggressive targets still exist in the future, but it requires action today. Some of the key targets, specifically by 2032, the state of California is expecting that 100% of packaging to be recycled or compostable, 25% reduction in single-use plastic packaging material, and a 65% recycling rate specifically for plastics. Beginning in 2027, there's going to be a focus on collectively achieving contributions from these manufacturing, selling, packaging into the state of California of acquiring $500 million per year to build recycling infrastructure and fund these programs specifically that address end-of-life management for these materials.
And I believe the goal of that $500 million is to improve the infrastructure and fund environmental programs that can make it easier for across the board the industry to be more sustainable.
Yep. I think one of the nuances here that's going to impact specifically the life science and pharma sector is that a lot of these goals, once again, there's no carve out for them. Many of our industry colleagues, manufacturers, et cetera, are going to be required to take action in these instances. But some of the designations, some of the requirements about requiring recyclable packaging or even compostable packaging will pose unique challenges to the life science sector. I mean, we see this in the laboratory today. Prior to polycarbon, recycling infrastructure didn't exist. Creating an incentive structure that may require these organizations to create compostable products, to me, is a very interesting obstacle for laboratories. Incentivizing manufacturers to create compostable products that can't be composted or can be diverted to an industrial composting facility seems to be a bit precarious. So yes, no exemptions for life science and pharma companies and the consumables that they're using. While there is a carve out for FDA regulated products and devices, there will be no carve out, or there is no carve out specifically for research or lab supply packaging.
Let's get really specific though. Pipette tip boxes, do they fall under SB54 now?
Yeah, so it's kind of a nuanced product depending upon the type of pipette tip box, but disposable racks, it seems pretty clear. If it is a rack that will be discarded after use of the product, it will be subject to SB54 regulation. It seems unclear, however, whether or not maybe reusable products or refillable racks will be regulated, but they're likely to be exempt, at least as it seems the regulation and legislation is written today.
The witness here, but it does seem like with closed loop resin from polycarbon that we would be already delivering on the core and key remits of SB54. Is that the case?
Shameless plug, but yes, definitely would be supporting any manufacturer that's trying to transact in California, one of the largest, most prominent life science and pharma hubs. We'd not only be able to support with the integration and contribution of circular resin, but also with the end of life management of these materials, which traditional MRF infrastructure currently does not manage quite well. So yeah, everyone thinks about pipette tip boxes specifically as it relates to packaging. As it appears today, the most common type of pipette tip product, the disposable rack, would absolutely not be exempt. It seems as if, however, maybe reusable or refillable racks would be.
And I think one of the more important things you and I discovered when looking into this was that SB54 is not a slush fund for undefined goals. Instead, everything is going to be required to have verified life cycle assessments and recyclability data. You cannot just pay money and claim you're doing the right thing. You're actually going to have to prove it. And another shameless plug, but there's a huge advantage when you track every single pound of material and you run it through a life cycle assessment. because it allows you to deliver for customers, for manufacturers, the amount of material that's going out to their customers and ultimately coming back in the form of a closed loop stream. So I think one of the more interesting questions that I can think of that comes from this subject is, do we think this is going to happen elsewhere? Is this going to happen in other states?
Yeah, very interesting you bring that up. About a week and a half ago, I attended the NERC Rethink Resource Use Conference. There's a number of talks specifically on this subject about there's an evolution of states that are now putting in place EPR legislation. It's pretty clear that there are already many other states that have similar regulations, like Oregon, Maine, Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland, and Washington. All of them either in the early stages or developing stages of this legislation. Um, very much so still wrestling with the reality and the rollout of this legislation in their markets today. I want to go back to one of the previous points that we made, because it seems as if there's a large incentive structure within this legislation to incentivize not only recyclable packaging but compostable packaging. Composting is incredibly important when it is targeted at the right materials. Many municipalities across the US, for example, in the state of Oregon, have really robust composting for food waste. I think that if we look at the incentive structure that may be created here for life science and pharma companies, one thing that I do worry about is incentivizing organization to create compostable products specifically, when many products designated as compostable may not have a verified or robust composting facility to be the offtake for that material. So whenever we're looking at legislation, whenever we're evaluating extended producer responsibility, we not only want to look at the incentives that are put in place, but also ensuring that this legislation is creating the back end offtake and infrastructure to manage the material that will then be produced by manufacturers trying to comply. So I, for one, definitely have some concerns here about incentivizing manufacturers to take on compostable products or designing products for compostability, when you and I have seen it firsthand that many laboratories barely have a recycling infrastructure for many of these high value polyolefin materials, let alone an infrastructure specifically for composting a pipette tip rack, let's say.
Yes, just because something is compostable does not mean it gets composted. And even if it's compostable, but it goes into landfill, it's not getting composted. It's being anaerobically broken down into methane and CO2, which is oftentimes a larger carbon footprint than if you had just used recycled plastic to begin with. So what about the EU? That's the last one I want to ask about because, California is a huge market here and has a lot of influence on consumer behavior and manufacturing behavior. But what are we seeing overseas?
Yeah, so the EU oftentimes leads the way, especially as it relates to EPR legislation. And I think that you're asking specifically about the EU packaging and packaging waste regulation that entered into force in February of 2025. Um, there's an 18-month transition, but the core obligations that are the thrust of this legislation will be going into effect in August of 2026. So there'll be staged requirements, reused, recycled content, digital labeling, and that will span from 2027 through 2030 and beyond. The Commission's PPWR page highlights targets that basically all packaging is recyclable by 2030. They're going to be thinking about and mandating higher recycled plastic content, but really the overall goal here is reducing total virgin material use throughout product packaging. But this is going to be harmonized across the block, and we'll see how that rolls out in the coming years here.
While we're wrapping up, I think it's worth calling out two organizations that have really gotten ahead of this, which would be LabCon and Novus Bio, two California-based manufacturers that are already adopting polycarbonate closed loop resin into their product manufacturing, and they are already situated to be in compliance with SB54 by the end of this year, which is truly incredible work.
Yep, we're hoping to see more manufacturers follow their lead here, not only embracing end-of-life disposal for these materials, but really rethinking circular design and integration of circular content into their supply chain. So with that, we'll wrap here, folks. As always, if there are topical bits like this that you'd like to hear from Polycarbon on, we'd welcome your feedback. We'd welcome any questions that you can write in here at support@polycarbon.com. Thank you all.
See you all next week.